With Petricore, how do you balance original IP work and client work? What's your secret sauce to be around for 10 years, to have that longevity?
I think having clear goals as a studio too, and this is just like any business in general, but just like where are you all heading, especially when you're a startup and money is more scarce or talent is hard to come by. Like it's important that there's that goal that everybody's invested in, and I think we've been able to refine that over the course of the studio. We're always learning new things and we're heading towards something rather than just shambling along to survive. And I think that's a trap a lot of studios that do original work and client work alongside each other. You can end up on that treadmill where you're just doing client work to survive and you're not heading anywhere. And then I think that's the downfall of a lot of studios that take that structure.
The VR Report podcast with David Jean O.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is David Jean O from the VR Report, and I have a very special guest, Ryan Canuel. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Dave?
For the audience, you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Massachusetts. We're still based here. And I went to school originally for game design in Worcester, Massachusetts, at a school called Becker College. They had one of the premier game design programs in the country. From there, I actually met a mentor who was the one who encouraged me, hey, you should start your own studio. I talked to him about, he'd been a serial entrepreneur, so I talked to him about, my dreams of one day doing it, but that I didn't want to take the jump, especially while I was young. And he was the one who said, well, now's the perfect time because you've got nothing to lose. And he was right. I had nothing to lose. None of us had homes and mortgages and families. And so it was the perfect opportunity. So I called up a bunch of people that I was friendly with and I worked together and said, hey, do you want to give this a try? And we did. So we started Petricore right out of college, and that was back in 2015. So it's been just about 10 years almost, starting next year that we've been doing this for.
That's fantastic. Massachusetts, a lot of people don't know a lot of game development happens in Massachusetts.
I mean, in the Boston area, there's several large studios that have a presence here now. Like Blizzard has offices. They acquired a studio. Epic has Harmonix, which is based here and it's been here for a long time. And when the BioShock studio had closed down, there was a real indie blossoming that happened around that time in terms of the amount of studios that got started and then eventually acquired. So yeah, there's a big game development scene here.
So we're changing up the format for these podcasts where we're going to start out with news and we're going to talk about some of the cool content that's been happening. So, what do you feel like in the content realm that gets you excited that's been happening lately in XR?
I was reading a Road to VR article about I Am Cat, which if you haven't seen it is, and it's hard to miss it. It's been on the top of the Quest store for weeks now. A silly game. They've trended quite well. Like you said, with alchemy and humor, it's just done quite well in terms of TikToks and short form content.
Yeah, I like I Am Cat because you play the role of a cat and you're basically messing with the person that owns the cat. I found it interesting. A lot of game developers are actually building content to figure out how they can go viral. Have you thought about ways to market your games through short form content?
We have. It's interesting. There was a great marketing panel at Connect, and it got me thinking more about this, that it's been something for us with our Mythic Realms title that we have been thinking about now that we're in development of, all right, what interesting short form content can we make with this? Definitely wasn't when we first started something that we were thinking about, and now with the next title, from the start, we want to be planning that, because that was one of my major takeaways from that panel was all the developers there from the start and the inception of the game were thinking about that.
I think comedy is something that resonates because it's a human emotion, and to experience that while you're embodied in a virtual setting just makes it so much more impactful. But it's hard to do. One title that also has a lot of humor, but in a different way. It was put out by Creature. Creature is a game publisher, and they created Starship Home. Starship Home is a new mixed reality game leaning towards Futurama, where you got a wrong package and you open the package and it's a mixed reality game. So you open this virtual package in your room. It was interesting because they actually thought about the player's room environment, where you're actually putting up the dashboard. You're now having a spaceship out of a box to now fly this package of exotic plants back to its homeland. So those two games I think people should check out. I Am Cat, Starship Home. In terms of news around technology, what are you excited about?
This was a research paper on a project called Augmented Physics, and I recommend checking it out because they used augmented reality to point at renderings in a textbook for examples of physics. So they have different charts and graphs and principles where you see how like a principle of physics plays out. But what they did is they augmented it so that you can actually like scroll or animate it, change the scenario, and see how changing like the angle affects what happens. And it just allows you to play out these physics examples and actually like see how they work in real time.
One thing that I brought up was Gaussian splats. You know, the venture reality fund, the company that I scout for, we invested in Gracia, which they do Gaussian splatting on the next level, where Gaussian splats, relatively new technology, 360-degree camera captures with a big array, compiling it all together. But the realism, you can then animate these actual images that become 3D is remarkable. It's photorealistic. You can see pores on people's faces, and seeing an animation come to life. It's one of those things technologically, we know that's the future. Like the metaverse today versus the metaverse 10 years from now, everything will be photorealistic. I mean, we want the holodeck, right? So moving on to the next topic, we call this unique trends. It could be good, bad, or ugly. What are unique trends that you think are fit into that category that's top of mind today?
Yeah, so I saw the announcement for Meta around the Motorola phones being able to be streamed on Horizon OS. I thought that was interesting. Like that to me, I hope that it expands to a wider array of phones, but the ability to just open that up on headset to me gives more use cases within Quest that I'm particularly excited about, because I think like we're game developers, so obviously we care a lot about the games ecosystem, but I think as a product it needs more than that to acquire a wider array of users. Like the more people that are in that ecosystem that are doing more things with those headsets, they're going to buy games and they're going to engage with games, but games might not be the way to get those people in. And so I feel like every time I see one of these non-games use cases, that's like, well, that's interesting, and that may catch a new group of people who otherwise would not have purchased the headset. That always gets me excited.
But I found it interesting that, you know, Meta is now also focusing on like, what is our phone solution when we don't have a phone? So I think that opens up a whole slew of possibilities. So I think that's super cool. My unique trend that I think is interesting, but you'll hear more of this as the industry grows, is teams changing the release dates. And you as a developer, you know how important to keep stern on your release date because you planned all this marketing. But with, Batman Arkham, the new title from Meta, it looks fantastic. It's what Assassin's Creed should have been for the Quest, but it's dynamite. But a smaller studio called Dig VR, I believe. It's kind of a cool concept for an indie title. You basically, have a tractor and you dig stuff. It sounds silly, but actually doing it's actually pretty fun because, everyone imagines like, what's it like being in those rigs? They took a different approach. We're just making it into a fun game where you just get to like dig stuff. And that kind of made news that they had a delay because of Batman, the new Batman Arkham game. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I kind of want to get into your origin story, Ryan. Tell people who you're about and why you're even here on the podcast.
Yeah. So we worked on a variety of games. We worked on projects in the mobile and PC market for a large portion of the start of the studio. And we were always interested in XR. Like our second ever project as a studio, we've had a mix of like original and work with outside clients, was Google Cardboard demonstration for a trade show. And prior to us starting the studio, we'd actually done some projects with Leap Motion. Our lead designer, one of his first projects in school was a Leap Motion game. We did a jam as a studio with DK2 and a Leap Motion connected to the front. We did like a shopping spree simulator game. So we were always interested as a studio, but we were reluctant to take that full plunge into XR. And I've got a talk I'm doing next week actually about that. I think more studios, and as we've looked at it in time, should, especially when you're young and you're new like us, should be willing to take that plunge. Like that's the perfect time. I think it was a mistake on our part to not. But we bounced around and we made games in different platforms. We worked with actually Google Stadia for a bit on a project before, unfortunately, their demise. But
rest in peace.
Yeah, it was cool tech. But we did that, and then after a few years, we were like, wow, we've done a lot of client work in this XR space, and we worked with like ad agencies and major brands building XR experiences. We worked with actually Xerox and the Palo Alto Research Center on some work, and just realized why are we doing sort of cutting edge, new emergent work on our clients, and then our games are, PC and mobile, it was this weird misalignment of, well, we have this like much desired skill set that is new for what the games space could be for it. Why are we not exploring that for our own work? And that was when we started being more invested and spent more time on XR than just more kind of traditional games. But that's kind of how we got into XR. Like what led me to games in the first place was just I've always been a huge fan of playing games myself, but I also was a fan of just entertainment in general. I did theater in high school and worked my way up to lead in a play. And it was always like I was always like enjoyed the entertainment. So like if I didn't do games, I would want to do film, or I wanted to be in some realm of entertainment. And so to me, that was the ability for games to be this like immersive way of experiencing a story, experiencing like a world that you have direct control over was just compelling to me. I played bigger RPGs like Mass Effect and Dragon Age and Bethesda games, and like these games that like told a story that would change, and those I fell in love with, and it made me want to make games myself, and that was what led me to go to school for it, and why we started the studio.
With Petricore, how do you balance original IP work and client work? What's your secret sauce to be around for 10 years, to have that longevity?
I think it's a mix of a whole bunch of things, but for me, one is that I found that when we're mixing our client and our original work, and that they're working together rather than pulling us in two separate directions, that's like the best of both worlds. So I admire and respect Shell Games. I think they're like an amazing example of this, is that they have multiple teams, they have client projects running, they have original IP that they develop, and they do an excellent job divvying that up amongst the team. But I think everything plays nicely with each other. Everybody's like learning the same stuff and moving in the same direction. And so for us, that's important, is I try to find client projects, and we're looking for work that aligns with the same skill sets that the original IP team is developing. And we're not trying to do things that move in different directions like we were when we were doing immersion XR work and also building flat screen PC games. I think having clear goals as a studio too, and this is just like any business in general, but just like where are you all heading, especially when you're a startup and there's money is more scarce, or talent is hard to come by. Like it's important that there's that goal that everybody's invested in, and I think we've been able to refine that over the course of the studio, and it keeps us all going in terms of we're always learning new things, and we're heading towards something rather than just shambling along to survive. And I think that's a trap a lot of studios that do original work and client work alongside each other. You can end up on that treadmill where you're just doing client work to survive and you're not heading anywhere. And then I think that's the downfall of a lot of studios that take that structure. And then I think off of that is like a willingness, though, and an openness to do what it takes to survive, if that's what you want to do as a studio. Like we've taken a lot of projects that I'd say probably were not completely aligned with our vision of where we wanted to be, but they paid the bills at the time, and they let us make it through a few more months, which led to an opportunity that was very much in the direction we wanted to go. And that's because core to our goals, it's keeping Petricore alive. It's surviving long enough to get more at-bats. And I think that's an important part of the strategy for us. And lastly, like it's culture. I think like you can't understate how much that's important. We've had the same core founding team for the entirety of the time that we've existed, which is like nearly unheard of. And so I spend a lot of time on the culture of the studio and defining it and making sure that it's something that we're all proud of. We practice a lot of transparency so that everybody here knows what's going on, when we're in trouble and when we're doing well. And I think that that's important for staying alive, is if everybody's happy and they like the work that they're doing, it makes it a lot more likely that everybody's going to stay and that you're going to keep moving in a direction. So I think those those things and a million other things all help, with making that model work.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for startups that are looking into this field. It's still a new burgeoning field, and it's tough to keep the studio alive. But what I learned from you is to make sure that there's clear delineation. You have to stay alive, but at the same time, you have to wear multiple hats, and you're building original IP to fund the work. So that can be super challenging. But that's the state of the industry. Like recently, with new hardware, with spectacles, Snapchat's foray into AR, and Meta's new announced AR glasses, they're also very new. And we don't even have developers yet because they haven't even fully been matured yet, and Orion hasn't even been released. What are your thoughts on spectacles versus Orion in terms of standalone AR glasses?
So you're right. It's difficult because I haven't had a chance to try Orion. And I think a lot of us remember, previous examples of cool demos that were shown in video format. And then you actually got to try it. And we're like, but I think for me, there's pluses and minuses to both. I think Meta is a little better positioned just in terms of the amount of Quest devices and their hold on content. Obviously, that's going to be difficult to bring any of that over to Orion. Like, it's a different world of content development. But I think that they have their Ray-Ban glasses. They have an ecosystem already of people who are buying XR devices within the Meta ecosystem. But I think Snap has it where it's out at least, and there's developers building for it. I would give it to Orion, though, because of the fact that I think that the vision of where that is heading is very compelling. And while spectacles are currently available and something that we're very much interested in, I also feel like the ecosystem that Meta has a bit more interconnectivity with other ecosystems. So, they have the partnership with Microsoft. They have the phone streaming it seems like they're building that out to be broader, whereas Spectacles and Snap very much still lives within the Snapchat platform. And I think if they can broaden that out, then it'll be a more compelling long-term product. But yeah, I'd give it to Orion.
Cool. So moving on to prototyping and testing. What's your approach, especially with AR, because it's a different form factor? You're actually now having to worry about your world, your room being messy, privacy concerns. What's your approach to prototyping AR? You also had a cool concept of giant monsters being able to fight in your urban landscape or your home, to actually put up your phone and see giant monsters fight amongst each other, which I thought was such a cool concept. What's your approach in prototyping AR today that you can give advice for developers?
So definitely the sooner that you can get something functional, the better. And I think that just goes for any prototyping in general. Specific to XR, I think you want to have an idea of why is this unique to XR and how does this being in XR make it compelling? I think, and that was for, our Mythic Realms title was, well, why would someone want this to be in mixed reality versus virtual reality? It's a question that we get asked pretty much every conference we take it to, anyone that we interact with online when we post about it. Why is this not VR? Why is it mixed reality? And I think for us, the answer is, we had a very physical combat system. You can jump on a couch, you can jump on your bed and stuff will crawl over it, but you can jump up and fire arrows down on something and they'll
so cool.
come at you. Yeah, but it's you couldn't do that in VR. You can't jump around the room like that. It was something that from the first prototype that we had, we wanted the ability to that would work. We had pathing in so that you could do that. And I think that that's something that when you're doing any prototyping in the XR space, it needs to be initially thought about is, yeah, this is a cool concept and this is something that's neat, but why is this inherently more interesting in XR versus if it was a flat screen game?
Yeah, I think that's poignant because even with AR, when you're prototyping, we did this a lot at the original Meta, but we would, in your theater background is kind of dawning on me now, we would act out scenarios because it's in the real environment, it's you in this space. So a lot of the early prototyping was a lot spent just on whiteboards and acting out what the user would experience. Do you do some of that?
We did some of that for trailer production, but we didn't do as much of that. I think when we're talking in design meetings, though, we are very physical. Like our lead designer, Oliver, he's good at this, where like when we're like trying to picture, like, okay, what do you mean by that? Like he will get up and act it out. So actually we do. Surprisingly, I'm not the one who does it, despite the background. It's the other people on the team, but it is a good way to showcase how it would actually play out. You're right, yeah.
Cool. So going back to Petricore, there's a lot of early founders that tune in. What business advice do you give for XR startups to ensure they have longevity?
So I think this just goes for any startup, and this is like, games, I give this advice out a lot. One is if you're doing a balance of original IP and client work, you need to be charging enough on those client projects. It's something I think a lot of companies struggle with, is not charging enough for the work that you're doing. Because you need to be charging enough, one, to cover your current bills, but also be saving up enough so that you can invest in your own property development, right? It's that, like, you don't want to stay on the treadmill, you are going somewhere, and this work is helping get you there. So I think that that's important, and to make sure that when you're doing your math and you're determining what your rates are, you're planning for that. I think that there's also the principle of like hunting versus farming work. It's very much like a sales concept, but it's important that if you're also doing this, you understand it takes a lot of time to go out and hunt. Obviously, humanity evolved from going out and hunting for food to farming and gathering because it's easier. And so, I spend a lot of time hunting for new clients, but then we also spend a lot of time like farming those clients internally. Like we want to make sure that once they come in, they love working with the studio. And so we like split that balance on the team as like I'm, filling that sales external capacity in the studio, going out and hunting. But our development team and our project manager, they're farming those projects, and they're making sure that those opportunities can become more opportunities, and we're not losing clients after I bring them in. We have a pretty good success rate as a studio of people coming back and working with us on another project or ideally multiple. And so that's something we're particularly proud of, but I think it's important for a lot of studios to build that up. And you do that through networking. I think like your location's a big differentiator. For us, it's, we're New England based, and I go to Reality Hack. I go to, the Harvard XR events. I go to, whatever is happening locally that we can stand out as an XR studio. So I also hit up a lot of non-XR game development events because I have a lot of friends that run studios that don't do XR. And every now and then an opportunity might cross their way, and it'll come to me because I'm the person, I'm the XR guy. I'm the one that won't shut up about it when they're trying to talk about something else. And so I think to me that's also important. And for original IP, it's important to again have that money set aside so that you can designate someone on your team to do the R&D and the prototyping to build that experience. Because I think for us as a studio, we spent a long time trying to do it in between projects, and it's a lot harder to get consistency, and you have that context switching, which is just bad for projects. So that's, again, if you're charging enough, you can have that dedicated person on the team, and we ended up doing that with Oliver, our lead designer on Mythic Realms. He was entirely dedicated to the prototype for that, and it yielded a better result.
So what is that scale do you use? Like, is there any specific formula? Like, well, if I put in this much time to finish this project, we probably want to have, like for most service businesses, you probably want at least 30 to 40% because it's service oriented. You're just paying for man hours, right? But at the same time, the client gets something beneficial. And of course, for service work, you're putting in the extra time. You can't charge for a lot of that stuff. Is there any kind of secret math that you can give, or in terms of managing time and your employees? Or like, how do you do that?
So, I mean, what you said, that's exactly for us, 30 to 40, 50% is amazing, but that's what we aim for. I think the other part of it that we do that I'd say is maybe more regimented than other game studios I see is we use, on our project management side, we track our hours for everything. And we're very clear with the team that it's not going to be used as why'd you spend 3 hours on that? It's not done in that way. It's done because we want to understand from project to project, where were we wrong about what was going to take a long time to do, and where were we right about, what was able to hit the targets we had anticipated. And I think without that data that you can keep learning from, it's hard to like refine that business model of how much are we charging for things. So for us, we track a lot and we work with a lot of data, and I'd say that's our like secret sauce is to do that.
So we're switching the context now. We're moving on to this new segment called XR Bull or Bear. I'm gonna bring up topics, and Ryan, you're gonna tell me if you're bullish or bearish, for these different topics. So mixed reality workspaces, MetaQuest 3's new feature. Is mixed reality productivity catching on? What are your thoughts?
I'd say I'm a bit on the bearish side for that. Part of the reason for that is just I've seen a variety of these different like XR workspace tool sets. I'm excited about the idea of it, but I haven't found it to be as useful for me yet as my current setup. So I'd say I'm a little more on the bearish side for that right now.
I'm with you on the bearish side. I love a lot of productivity apps. I love the new workspace. I love Arthur. I love Engage VR, a lot of non-gaming use cases. But for the Quest, Facebook had created Blue Jeans, which is their teleconferencing platform. A lot of enterprise companies couldn't catch on because, hey, it's a social media network. Like, a lot of bad experiences of past things like Cambridge Analytica, right? So I think with Microsoft, with their offering, I'm glad that they're saying, hey, we're gonna get back into XR, considering that they kind of halted things on HoloLens, because Microsoft already has the ecosystem for using an enterprise. So and it ties in with all their other suite. Apple also has the advantage there because Apple is also embedded with enterprise. So I think focus for Meta, especially around work and productivity. I know this is probably going to hurt a lot of my friends who are in this space, but I think right now I'm also bearish. How about AI-driven NPCs in games?
I'm a little more bullish on that with some caveats, but I think to me that's interesting. I don't know if fully AI-driven NPCs are quite as compelling, but I like the idea of a mix of scripted alongside AI to help give more context to what your engagement with these NPCs is. There's some cool companies that are doing that, and I think about Elder Scrolls Skyrim as an example. I remember there was a town, I played it a lot, there was this town I'd always go and I'd sell my stuff in, and I'd been there hundreds of times, and I went to the town and one of the guards was like, "You're new here." And I thought, I'm not new here. I come to this town every single day. I'm the economic linchpin of this town. So I think that for me, AI allows like a more intelligent interaction where it just like feels like you're in that world and what you're doing in that world is being recognized. So yes, I'm more bullish on that.
I'm more bullish as well. InWorld, it's also a company that the venture reality fund invested in. They developed tooling for AI NPCs to be more interactive. However, it still needs a lot of human touch. To your point, I think it's a mix between human input to make sure like maybe it's the first intro of a character, making it very compelling when it relates to the story. But to your point, just to push the story along, it remembers you, has context of what you've done before. It just makes it more interactive. How about hand tracking as a primary input today?
I'm bullish on hand tracking as well. We're not doing it for Mythic Realms. I think that the one downside is a lack of haptic feedback, especially when it comes to gaming. I think haptics are quite important, and it's something that we do in Mythic Realms, and we just are using the controllers to do a lot of also menuing. But I think for more simple experiences, it's great. It just feels very natural to use your hands, and I like a lot of experiences that I've tried where hand tracking has been the primary means of interacting. I think it depends on the experience, though.
Yeah, of course. Like with your game Mythic Realms, there's a lot of combat. Like you know, it only makes sense that you're holding a controller. But then we talked about Starship Home earlier. But yeah, that's primary input of hands. So for me today, as a primary input, I think it depends, just like you said, on the experience. But I'm also very bullish. But it depends on the content. Extended reality fitness. What do you think about fitness genres? Is it played out? Do you think there's still room for other incumbents to come up? Are you bullish or bearish?
I'm bearish on new platforms. I think that there is an established market there. I think that there's obviously opportunity to innovate and do new things, but I talk to a lot of people about XR who aren't as familiar, and I mean 90% of the time when I talk to anyone, they're like, Yeah, I've done VR. Like I had it, I played with it. I was into Supernatural though. Or like, like it's
Right.
always that. It's and so I think like a lot of the casual users of XR, those are like they love those use cases, but there are like established entrenched players in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the flip side. I am bullish, but I agree with you. It's tough for incumbents to try to innovate on established platforms where there are already audiences. Like even Beat Saber may be considered a fitness game, and people are losing weight. Obviously, we've read all the reports. Like, it's tough, and unless you're innovating in a very different way, and bringing value that people haven't seen before in fitness, it's challenging there.
Yeah.
Haptic gloves and suits. We don't have the wear all mass produced haptic suits yet. But what do you think about gloves and what do you think about suits?
I'm bearish on that. I think there's something interesting about it for hardcore enthusiasts who want a like very immersive experience. How big of a market that is to make those products compelling. I don't think that it's quite there, and I don't see it getting there in the long run. I think actually people want less stuff on them and they want to spend less money on this, like as cheaply as possible, get into it. So that's how I feel about it. Yeah.
That's cool. I am also very bearish. I agree with all that. WebXR adoption. Whatever happened to the no closed garden? What happened to the WebXR? What happened, man? Like we kind of forgot about that.
I'm a bit bullish on WebXR to an extent. I think that it's still great to be able to jump in. Actually, I'll switch. I'll be honest. I'm a little more bearish on it. To me, I think the main problem currently is that it works well for like short form ad agency, quick in and out experiences. It's more difficult for larger experiences. I think just from the monetization side, like there isn't a great solution as far as I'm aware to like monetize an experience on the web yet when it comes to XR. And so to me, I think that'll be the biggest hindrance to getting developers to use it. For us, it would be something that would be risky to do.
Yeah, I'm bearish today, but in 8 years, every Fortune 100 company will have some type of web presence. I like some of the tooling that's happening. Needlepoint is pretty cool, where they give you all the tools to build your VR, XR websites. But again, just like how do you monetize? Just like the early days of the web,
Yeah.
couldn't monetize. So yeah, I'm with you on that. Virtual real estate.
I'm bearish on that. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think that like once there's a like Second Life-esque scale game with like a significant user base, they obviously proved that virtual real estate was a thing and you could do well through it. So I don't think it's totally unproven that it can be successful. I think in the sort of crypto NFT side of things, I'm more bearish that that's going to continue to be much of a thing.
Agreed. XR therapy and mental health.
I'm very bullish on that. I think that there's a number of use cases, and I've seen a lot of success from places for that.
I'm with you as well. Location-based VR post-pandemic.
I'm bullish there too. It seems like that places still continue to be doing well, and a lot of the co-located experiences I've tried have been some of the most fun that I've had in VR. I think mixed reality also opens up a whole new avenue for that.
Yeah, I recently reviewed Sandbox VR's original pitch deck, and it was interesting because those founders took a very bold move. They told you all the reasons, but this was back also in 2016, that, hey, these are all the reasons why VR sucks and you shouldn't invest in us. And but their main strategy, which they've proven successful in that deck because it was for their Series A, they were focused on like the virality. I think, again, it's a very similar theme where they knew that once people started high-fiving in VR and people were Instagramming it and putting it on their feeds, they knew they had something. So they actually built games around that. And their biggest claim to fame was also shifting the narrative of just being VR-based location VR, like an arcade. Hey, we want to be publishers. They created all the content internally and then, are working with third-party developers. So for me, I'm in the post-pandemic world. I am very bullish. I think, for those experiences, you can only do that in VR where you're shooting monsters together with a full suit and getting all that real immersion from all that technology. So cool. This is awesome. I want to switch gears now to Petricore. I never asked you this, but Petricore is a very unique name. I just looked it up and tried to the definition. If you put an H in there, Petricore is kind of a beautiful word. It means that smell after a rain. Did you think of that or?
Yeah. So when we named the company Petricore, one of the founding team members had pulled up a list of like the 50 most beautiful words because we were trying to figure out what do we name the studio. And we were just like rattling them off, and one of them was Petricore, and I was like, well, what is that? And he's like, oh, it's the smell after rain. And we were like, oh, that's a great word.
Yeah.
And that's like a great thing. Like it's a universally, I think, beloved thing. Like I think everybody likes
I
that.
hate the smell of freshness in life.
Right? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So it's something that for us, and this is something I've refined in the pitch over time from, oh, gee, we just like that word. But to us, like we make these like universally pleasant games, I think. Like we try to make them as accessible as possible. And that's something that appeals to like as broad of an audience as possible. And I think like the word Petricore does a good job encapsulating that. We spell it wrong solely based on the fact that I can't spell. And when I tried to write Petricore on the whiteboard, I spelled it wrong as we have it spelled for the studio. But when we all kind of stepped back and looked at it, we were like, that kind of looks more like a tech company, the way that you spelled it versus the way it is spelled. And so we just went with it because we thought we were students at the time. We were like, that sounds like a tech company. We should name it.
That's awesome. I love that story. Now let's talk about Mythic Realms. Like, I like the emboldened aspect of multimodal, having, combat, but done in a very friendly way. And I think that's way you get more mass adoption. Was that the directive?
Yeah. The initial concept was all around what are like a fantasy that people have that, is very common in flat screen gaming, but isn't something that, is served in mixed reality. And for us, that was one where we were like, just trying to pie in the sky, like what's cool, right? And we were like World of Warcraft, but in the world, like that, like you are a hero and you're going like, that's so cool. That's a fantasy a lot of people have. And we were like, okay, scale it down. We're a 9-person studio. We can't make WoW. But with Mythic Realms, we thought about like, you are the hero, you're using these weapons, you're fighting monsters in your room, you're going on these adventures. That was the directive, was like that you should feel at all times like you're the hero and you're going on these adventures. And we also wrapped this metagame around it where you're going into virtual reality and you're building up this kingdom over time. So all these mixed reality expeditions you go on, that's where you gather the materials you need and you progress through quests and you further the story and defeat these like epic room scale boss fights that each of the dungeons ends in. And as you gather those materials, you bring them back to VR, and that's how you like build up your kingdom. And as you build up the kingdom, you become more powerful to do the more challenging dungeons that we have. So that's like the loop. And that was the other core part of the game was I think, there's some compelling mixed reality demos out there, but they lean very smaller tech demo, I think, at the time when we were building. We just didn't see like huge, robust, large, 10-hour mixed reality games. So we also wanted to build something that had like more progression to it and had like you could sink some time into it if you enjoyed it. So that for us was core to when we were building Mythic Realms. I've heard it described as hybrid reality. A friend of mine described it that way, and I was like, that's great. I'm stealing it.
I like that.
Yeah, Ted Brown, formerly at Snap. I'll give him a shout out.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, Ted. So yeah, I think that's what we approached. And it actually worked well from a design mechanism as well for, like I mentioned earlier, the combat's very physical. People can only do that for so long in mixed reality. So the VR kingdom gives like a rest. Every expedition is several minutes, but then it ends and you go back to the kingdom always. And it's like a built-in rest period in the game. And it was clever. Our lead designer, Oliver, had come up with that flow for the game, and it just works nicely where you just have these built-in moments where you just like can sit down and just go through VR and hang out in your kingdom and then go back and do an expedition. So I love the twist from a dungeon crawler where you just actually have your treasure that you can see from a menu, but you can actually now relax, but it also makes sense with the actual gameplay. That's super cool. In terms of the target audience, how do you determine the audience? Because it seems like it's casual and it's very lively and vibrant.
Were you focused on a specific age demographic, and how did you make sure you fulfilled that promise for them?
This goes against, I think, most core good business model principles. Truthfully, though, I think just given how new mixed reality is, we were focused on how do we build just a cool mixed reality role-playing game that we would all want to play. And we weren't thinking as much about what is the specific age demographic that we're adhering to, partly because it was so uncertain, like what is the age demographic of mixed reality, like point to that in general is tough, like to even pin that down. And so there was like this speculative nature to it, but I think that Meta was on board with that in terms of like, this is new and like you have an interesting idea and let's see what happens. So we're a little bit throwing it out to see. I'd say for us, it does lean more casual, and I think we're imagining this game. I don't want to say like it's built for a younger audience, but it definitely is a physical experience, and I think that does tend to appeal to the more guerrilla tag, like that demographic. So we did play more into that as we developed the game further, but there's so much uncertainty also around like mixed reality and who's engaging with mixed reality and what is that audience going to be. So, yeah.
Well, I thought it was brilliant because a lot of your mixed reality things that you do with interact with the environment, the player has to actually get physical in their own space, and most adults, like 40-year-old me, is not going to jump on my couch, So
we might get you. You don't know.
Yeah,
Skeletons are scary when they
100%, 100%. But I think also with the growing adoption with Meta Quest 3S, is the cheaper version. Yeah. I think Meta is going to have a great holiday. I think come on, every time you're in any multiplayer setting now, you hear the kids. They're they're using another account with their parents or adult supervision headset, or they're buying them. They're just rich kids that they can be able to do so. But you see this trend where kids are they're most engaged. That's why Gorilla Tag has 1 million, I think, daily active users, a monthly active. It was pretty substantial. So I thought you're positioning it well. I think that audience is prime for the taking, especially with 3S coming out. So everyone should check out Mythic Realms. This is something that everyone has to have on their holiday list.
And it's available for pre-order now at a discount if you pre-order before launch. So we'll come out towards the end of this year, and you can search for it on the store page. It'll come up. Yeah. It's
going to be fantastic. Awesome. Ryan, any parting words for the audience?
No, I think, I appreciate you having me. This was great. I know it was great to catch up again after I saw you at Connect. I'd say, as maybe one last note is that, again, we still do a lot of external work with clients. So if anybody is interested in looking for a partner, we're always particularly interested in projects where there aren't easy answers and there's a sticky problem to be solved. Like that's our perfect project. That's what led us to be interested in Mythic Realms. So if anybody's working on a project like that and they need a team that can come in and help with that, we're always looking for opportunities there as well.
That's fantastic. So these can be indie studios. They just need to have extra resources. You're willing to work on different projects, even other games, and you provide that support, especially with now your experience with Meta, building a mixed reality title.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much, and happy Friday.
Thanks.